creators of Reddit, what's the worst first date you've ever seen? Well, I didn't technically see it, but it must have been pretty bad. I work at a hospital and I answered a call on the ward from a patient's son. He asked how his mum was going, then asked if I could call him back in a few minutes because he was losing reception. I called him back and a woman answered. I said hello, this is Damnation 182 from the Reddit hospital, is XXXX there? She passed the phone over to the same man I spoke to a few minutes earlier and gave him a quick rundown, and he said thank you and hung up. Didn't think anything of it until the next day when I saw the patient's son on the ward. He thanked me for calling him back because he was apparently on the worst date ever, where the woman wouldn't stop talking about her ex-boyfriends, all of their flaws, and how much she hates men. He apparently called from the bathroom, went back and left the phone on the table, then went to the bar to get drinks. I called, the bad date answered, and he told her his mum had been in a car accident and he had to go ASAP. His mum was there for a routine tonsillectomy. Bravo, sir. I was working in a small restaurant with 2 floors. A woman and a man came in and I had a table for them upstairs. It looked like they had a first date because they were asking those getting to know each other questions. After ordering food, the woman had to go to the toilet, which is downstairs. As she walked to the stairs, the food arrived. She walked down, tripped and fell all the way down, knocking her head on the ground. 2 colleagues immediately rushed over to her to see how she was doing. She was unconscious and bleeding from her head, so they called an ambulance. I went to the man while he already started eating and told him his partner didn't know how to call her, fell down the stairs and that she was unconscious and that an ambulance was on the way. He walked to the stairs, looked down and walked back to his table to finish his food. Later the ambulance arrived and I asked him if he wanted to go with him to the hospital and he said no while finishing her food as well. It was so awkward, he just sat there for another 45 minutes eating, drinking, paid the bill and left. I still don't know what kind of relationship they had and whether the woman is okay. Did you just witness an assassination? I work in a hospital and had the opposite happen. An older woman came in with an older fellow who had a heart attack and died on their second date. She was in tears but kept trying to talk herself out of it because they'd only met twice. It was a bummer of a shift. Oh my god, that's fucking brutal. I definitely have seen a lot of awkward last dates. I used to work at a very small neighborhood restaurant. Everyone that came in was a regular. Most were couples in their 40s, 50s, out for a quiet dinner. But there was one standout. A very handsome man in his early 30s would come in, it seems, only to break up with women. About twice a month he would come in with a beautiful woman and partway through their meal she would be crying. I always tried to clean the tables near them for as long as possible, but I never heard much of his speech. He always tipped well and was super nice to me and my coworkers. It was just brutal seeing him bring in a new lady and knowing what she was about to go through. Plot twist. He's an oncologist who takes terminally ill patients out for a nice meal to hear their diagnosis. That could make for a totally fucked up movie, miniseries. Would watch. We could call it Wilson. I work in an Italian restaurant. A few years ago I waited on a guy and girl who met for the first time upon arriving at the restaurant. There were awkward pleasantries exchanged at the door and then they were seated. When I was taking their order, the guy asked if we had soup because he had mouth surgery a few days prior and chewing food was still a little rough. We don't have soup, so I explained that the softest food on the menu was gnocchi. He ordered the house gnocchi and proceeded to cut each tiny dumpling into 4 or more pieces and slowly chew each piece. He ate that entire dish over a 3-hour period and the girl stuck it out for the whole thing. She looked miserable and I'm pretty sure they never saw each other again. More a story of an on-date. I worked at a cafe and it was a small local chain, so there were 2 other locations in the city. This guy sits down for about an hour and comes up to the counter and asks if we can call around to the other locations to see if this girl was there because they had a date planned and he was sure she must have just gone to the wrong location. We called to the other 2 locations and they said they never saw anyone fitting the description. The guy stuck around for another couple hours, buying 2 more drinks and a sandwich, just waiting until we finally closed for the night. I felt so awful for him. He seemed so crushed. I always feel like you ought to just cancel. Like no showing is an awful thing to do to a person. At least if you cancel they can try to go about their day. He made a comment to her about how he's not Jewish, so she should order whatever she wanted. She was Jewish. Spent the rest of the evening in silence as he went on about how his ex-girlfriend was anorexic and so annoying about food. He was happy to be on a date with a woman who could eat like a normal person. So weird. Edit. One of the only times she spoke was to respond that she was Jewish. It was a quiet night in my restaurant and I was nearby doing side work. She seemed like a very shy person. My soul hurts. I work at IOP. About once a week 2 middle school, early high school age kids come in and sit a table away from each of their parents and kiss and hug on each other excessively. One time I think the guy was getting a hand job underneath the table. The parents just maintain conversation and pretend not to notice. The kid is also a huge dickhead. Served a couple a few months ago. Every time I walked over, he would always be the one talking, and she would just be sitting there not having a good time. At the end I asked if it was one bill or separate and she immediately piped up separate. I go and take his payment, and as I hand over the debit machine to the girl, I see the guy take his phone out and start swiping through Tinder. Lol, he's like, this is not working. Next, MTV flashback. Steps off bus next. Late to the party here, but I was bartending in NY and watched this couple that had met on Tinder have their first date sitting at my bar. The girl was a complete maniac, kept bringing up the fact that the dude she was with could be a psychopath and could murder her. He had given no indication of this, and went on Tinder while he was still sitting beside her at the bar, kept telling him he was lucky that she agreed to meet him at all and she didn't think he'd be this boring. She ordered about 5 or 6 lits and several shots. He literally just had 2 beers. She made him pay for everything. My favorite part of this shit show was that he excused himself to go to the bathroom and left through the fire escape. Absolutely brilliant. To be clear, there was only one official entrance and exit. This dude escaped out the back and she went searching for him. Straight up thought he had disapparated out of the bar. Up voted for the word disapparated. Had an obvious first date where the lady was grilling the guy on how much money he makes and he didn't really want to answer. It was awkward serving steak and salad during an interrogation. Lol. Why would someone do that? Well, I can figure exactly why they did it. I ain't saying she's a gold digger, but she ain't messin' with no broke gentleman. Olive Garden, around 2014 or so, from like 7:30. Close on a weeknight, middle-aged man of sub-average attractiveness was sitting alone at a table with a glass of water, insisting that his date would be just a few minutes. There's traffic. At around 9:15, manager had to come out and let him know that the restaurant would close at 10, and if he'd like to place a food order, he should probably do it now. He ordered a bruschetta to appetizer, and said again that his date was on her way and they'd order when she got there. 9:45. This beautiful woman walks in and awkwardly stands by his table. I couldn't hear the conversation they had, but the man then asked for a box for the appetizer and they wound up leaving together without her even sitting down. Wow, was not expecting that to have a happy ending. Was it though? My dollar is on escort. When I was a waitress, my favorite couple was an escort and her regular John. He looked like George Costanza, short, fat, bald, no style, super shy though and couldn't make eye contact with me. She was a breathing Barbie doll, sweet as pie, super charming, and she tipped really well and signed her name with little hearts. After a few years of them coming in every few months, I noticed that this dude looks different, better somehow, stronger, better posture, less flabby looking. So I ask him, hey man, you're looking really good. Did you change something? He is too shy to really answer and mumbles something about losing some weight. I'm like, no, you're carrying yourself differently. Your whole presence is different. So Barbie escort presses him with a cheerful go on tell her, and he confesses that he's taken up weightlifting and cycling recently and was thinking about doing a triathlon. I like to think she was escort life coach. That's adorable.